All right, let's kick this off with a fact that is, honestly, pretty wild. Every single country in the world is in debt. Yeah, you heard that right. Not some of them, not most of them, all of them. From the biggest economies to the smallest, everyone owes money.
I mean, just look at Japan, one of the most advanced nations on the planet. Its national debt is over 250% of its GDP. Now, GDP is basically the value of everything a country produces in a year. So Japan has a $9 trillion debt, but its economy is only worth about $4 trillion. How is that even possible?
And, this is where it gets confusing, right? Because in our own lives, we're taught that debt is this terrible thing you have to avoid at all cost. It's a huge risk. So why on earth are entire countries, these massive global players, operating in a way that would totally bankrupt you or me? That's the big puzzle we're going to piece together.
To really get this, we've got to start with a super basic money problem that pretty much every government on the planet faces. Just think of a country's finances like your own household budget, but with a whole lot more zeros at the end. There's money coming in, and there's money going out.
So on one side, you've got all the income. This is mostly stuff like taxes, money from companies the government owns, and so on. But then, on the other side, you've got these enormous expenses, building new highways, paying millions of public employees, funding social programs. And here's the kicker, for almost every country, the expenses are always higher than the income.
So this gap, this annual shortfall between what a government spends and what it actually earns, has a fancy name, the fiscal deficit. And that deficit, that hole in the budget, has to be filled somehow. The only way to do it? You got it. By borrowing money.
Now you're probably thinking, well, why don't they just fix the deficit? Great question. The problem is there are really only two ways to do that, and both of them are political poison. Option 1, a government could slash its spending, but that means stopping big projects, cutting jobs, and basically slamming the brakes on the whole economy. And, as you can imagine, people get pretty furious. Option 2, they could raise taxes. But that also sucks money out of the economy, slows down growth, and, surprise, surprise, makes people really angry.
So, if cutting spending and raising taxes are both off the table, what's left? Yep, borrowing becomes the go-to solution. But it's not always just about plugging a hole in the budget. A lot of the time, governments actually choose to go into debt for some very strategic reasons.
First off, there's development. You can't just build a massive bullet train system with 1 year's tax money. You need to borrow for those huge, ambitious projects. Second, it's a way to jumpstart a sluggish economy by pumping cash in to create jobs. Third, and this is a big one, is for emergencies. Think pandemics, wars, natural disasters, when you need a ton of money fast. And then there's the last one, which, well, this is where things can get a little dicey. Borrowing new money just to pay the interest on your old loans.
Okay, so this brings up a huge question, right? If an entire country needs to borrow billions or sometimes even trillions of dollars, who in the world has that kind of cash to lend out? Well, it turns out the lenders fall into three big buckets. First, and this might surprise you, it's their own citizens. Second, you've got foreign entities that could be investors, big banks, or even other countries. And third, there are the big international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank.
The most common way this all happens is through something you've probably heard of, a government bond. It's basically a fancy IOU. You give the government some money, and in exchange, they give you a piece of paper that promises to pay you back in the future plus interest. It's considered one of the safest investments in the world. And it's not just regular people buying them. Foreign countries are massive investors. For example, Japan and China each hold over $1 trillion worth of U.S. government bonds.
But what happens when things go really wrong? When a country is in so much trouble that nobody wants to lend them money anymore? That's when they make a call to the world's emergency lender, the International Monetary Fund, or the IMF. The IMF steps in with emergency cash to stop a country from going completely bankrupt. But there's a huge catch. The loans come with really harsh conditions, forcing countries to make deep spending cuts and raise taxes, which can sometimes just push a struggling economy even deeper into trouble.
So we know why countries borrow and who they borrow from. But this all leads us to the real trillion-dollar question. Is all this debt actually a problem? And the answer is, it's complicated. It all comes down to the crucial difference between what we can call good debt and bad debt.
At the end of the day, it really boils down to this one simple question. What is the purpose of the loan? Is that borrowed money being used for something productive that's going to create growth down the line? Or is it just being burned on short-term spending?
A really easy way to think about this is to use an analogy from our own lives. Good debt is kind of like a home loan. You're borrowing to buy an asset that will, hopefully, grow in value over time. For a country, that's like borrowing to build a new port that boosts trade and grows the entire economy.
On the flip side, bad debt is like taking out a loan for a brand new car that starts losing value the second you drive it off the lot. For a country, that might mean building fancy palaces, or, even worse, just borrowing money to pay off the interest from last year's loan. Because when a country keeps piling on that bad debt, it can get stuck in something truly dangerous, the debt trap. This is a vicious cycle where you have to keep borrowing more and more money every single year just to cover the interest payments on the money you already owe. It's a downward spiral that can lead straight to bankruptcy, which is exactly what we've seen happen in places like Sri Lanka and Pakistan.
But, and this is a huge but, this is where the comparison to our personal finances completely breaks down. This is maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. As an individual, you have to pay back everything you borrow, the original amount plus the interest. But for a country, the entire global financial system is built on the idea that they will never fully pay back the principal. A country is seen as something that's eternal, so the only thing that really matters is that it can afford to make its interest payments.
This lays out the difference perfectly. For us, debt has a clear end date. The goal is to get that balance down to zero. For a country, the debt is considered perpetual. The goal isn't to pay it off, it's just to manage it, to keep paying the interest, and to keep the economy stable. This is how a country can literally be in debt forever, as long as its economy is growing fast enough to handle those interest payments.
So we'll leave you with one last, kind of tricky thought to chew on. When a wealthy country lends a bunch of money to a developing one, is it pure charity? Well, often there are strings attached. A lot of these loans say that the borrowing country has to buy equipment and hire companies from the country that's lending the money. So in the end, the money goes out as a loan and then circles right back home, creating business and jobs for the lender's own economy. It's a complex game where helping others can also be a very, very good way of helping yourself.